Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi, everyone. It's Roxanne Derhaj. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Today, I have a special colleague, Kristin Engvig, here with us. She's in Switzerland, and she's going to talk to us today about an amazing organization that she started 25 years ago. Kristin, that's a long time to be dealing with women in leadership. So thanks for coming on to have this conversation with us today.
Thank you, Roxanne. It's an honor to be here with you and to share my journey and to be in conversation with you as well.
So, I think for the last couple of years, there's been pain points that have been highlighted that clearly, globally, we need to focus on certain things. Obviously, diversity and inclusion, female issues, obviously, with women leaving, unfortunately, positions in droves because of the pressures that they've been under, those types of things. I want to talk a little bit about 25 years ago. So I'm trying to think of what got you on that path. And I'm going to say that probably back then, that may have been a lonelier, quieter path with not as much knowledge back then. So what got you working with women?
Yes, it's a very interesting thing. Sometimes I wonder too, but I will share the three sort of triggering moments in my life that made me start doing this. And one was I was working straight out of an MBA. I started work in banking, the top firms, and doing the kind of right job at the time when that was the thing to do. But working there, I felt I was good at my job, technically speaking, but I found that there was something in the environment that didn't really fit. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel I was thriving, and there was something as if I wore a suit that wasn't mine, that didn't fit me. So I didn't know. I couldn't pinpoint. I couldn't say why, and I didn't even think it had anything to do with gender. I thought maybe because I was young, it was difficult to be heard. Maybe because I was a foreigner, I wasn't listened to. There were many things I had in my mind. Now, I left at a certain point reading Pinkola Estes' book on women running with wolves and The Ugly Duckling, which is the story of H.C. Andersen. And then I realized, that story of an ugly duckling who suddenly realized he was, or she was, a swan. But that's me. So the power of context, of being in a place, in a culture, in a corporate culture, that made me feel like an ugly duckling was very powerful. And I realized that, if I am in another context where I'm more seen, heard, valued, and even felt, I can be who I really am, a swan, playing with other swans and making beauty in the world, something, something like that. And then I quit and I got a job kind of fast. Someone was looking for teachers to teach marketing in Eastern Europe. And that was my specialization in school. And this was this European Union funded project to make Eastern Europe get into market economy. So I was jumping on this project, and I went to many countries, including Russia, Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, traveled around the world. And it was on these trips that I realized that these bright women didn't always have the same choices as me. And I've been to Latin America, I've been to Africa, I've been all over. And as a Norwegian woman, I grew up with such egalitarian and such possibilities. I traveled because I wanted to travel. I got educated. The state gives you support. I had all the choices, or at least I thought so. I also realized I had to work with myself. But there was something that triggered me one time. I was in some little town in Russia, and all the women wanted to get out of there, and they didn't want to be there. I thought, why? And I started to reflect, and And back in Milan, where I lived at that time, I was very active in a women's network, which I love because that's where became my family, my community. And living away from my home country, Norway, at the time, I was like so happy with that family feeling and that networking and that helping each other. So one day I thought, let's do something for the women. And how about an event where we discuss the big picture of things, the world, to make it easier for all women, because I had experienced that not all women had choice. And then also let's look at the workplace. So we are all in a context where we can thrive, because my experience had been it wasn't always like that. And then at an individual level, let's help each other, let's network, let's create communities, and let's keep learning. So these are sort of the three background moments that started me, but it was really like, oh, let's do one. It was a one-off event, and it was very impactful, and people wanted it again. And then a lady from IBM was sitting next to me, and she said, oh, next time if you do it again, I can give you the venue. Somebody else came in, I can sponsor you the coffee. So it started very much as a kitchen operation, as a volunteer thing, and it continued like that for quite a while until it got too big, and we had to transform it into something more professional. But yeah.
So I think naturally that women, I think, and it's because the way we're socialized, we have that innate capacity to just be around each other and connect at a profound level.
Yeah.
And with transformational leadership, what we know is that women bring that to the fore. They bring that, and sometimes intuitively, they're not even aware that they're doing that. So it sounds like what you did was you kind of recognized, wow, this is a nice space. And I was in corporate for 25 years. And a lot of times, there's this prickliness that comes with being in corporate. And as a woman, and I was in my 20s, you just kind of keep pushing through, right? Like, that's probably not because I'm a woman, but you try to maybe make up some ideas why potentially you might be being treated this way.
Absolutely.
And we're talking 25 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know.
And today we openly talk about mentors, mentees, all these concepts like allyship. So we've had a vast voyage, and I could see how wind would have been a part of that process. In your early years, what were some of the limitations that you came up against with having people recognize authentic female leadership?
Yeah, there were many challenges. First of all, and for me, it was also difficult to be young. But then I realized it can be anything, because later in life it can be even difficult that you're older. So whatever excuse it is out there, but I did have that as a challenge. This thing of being young. I brought with me people that were older at me at meetings, just telling them not to talk because maybe they didn't know what they were going to say, but they looked older. So I tried to I had this particular person with me to a lot of meetings. When it comes to authenticity, I thought that was very interesting. So I started a whole exploration on authenticity. And today also the whole WIN organization has a tagline, a leadership journey, because I've seen that at an individual level, so many of us have sort of worked to explore, who am I? What is my authentic self, and how can I contribute with the uniqueness of me? And then I noticed that many women around the whole planet are part of doing that too. So it's also a collective uprising of women longing at least to be more authentic. But what I saw that was so difficult is that these corporate cultures, or even political cultures, even in society, there's so many systems that are being designed. The whole architecture of our societies, and particularly many cultures, are made by this sort of masculine, or the masculine way of thinking, and even women, we have grown up in these cultures and believing too that this is okay and it's the way it's supposed to be. So only when we start exploring who am I and learning about more the feminine masculine balance, the yin yang, do we start thinking, oh yeah, maybe there is another way. So the challenges, I think, have been on many levels. One, in society level, but two, also being for my generation, at least amongst the early people starting this exploration, and I think, Roxanne, you also have been amongst the early ones. So when you started that work early, there were few other people understanding what I was talking about. So then even the women themselves could be a hinder somehow, because they were also very keen on being accepted into the corporate cultures, into the political cultures, instead of trying to stake out their own way. And of course, I've learned that we need to balance it a little bit, because we need to also fit in a little bit and then slowly start changing. But this balance, but this consciousness, this awareness about what's going on is what's really, really important.
I found that sometimes female executives in my early career was sometimes the most difficult colleagues to find my grounding with. And at times, you know, the male colleagues were actually easier to kind of accept you into that space. And so definitely I know now with younger female leaders, they're constantly looking at sponsorship and how they can assist. So it's such a refreshing space now, you know, like you said, with the newer generation, to look at them and go, and then when they openly say, how can I help in the different, you know, masterminds or forums where I'm involved with, and you will openly hear female CEOs start talking about, you know, their real journey, not the journey that the public sees, but they will openly talk about, you know, when I started my business or when I sat on that board, and so it's, you know, it's interesting. So back, you know, in the 90s when I was in corporate, you're quite literally keeping so much in because you're trying to not show that vulnerability, because the perception and sometimes the reality is if you were too vulnerable, it means you couldn't handle it. And the, you know, the doors that should have been open for you sometimes got shut because of that space. So, you know, now when you think about that, right, like, and kind of where we're at, how is it that you think corporate or different environments with female leaders are accepting that element of vulnerability?
So since the early start, when we were sort of preaching that at the WIM conference, and when it was in a way a complete revolution, right? It was a revolution. And I feel that WIM was also pioneering a lot of these things, because it was even before Brené Brown and everybody. So now when you have thousands of people having read, or millions, Brené Brown on vulnerability, and this is a corporate text, let's say, one would believe that now in corporate, one is more open to it. It's hard to say. I think we are in this incredible shift, because I meet and I work, because conference participants, many are coming in from corporations. So I meet these amazing humans that are open, vulnerable, on their authentic path, and they work in corporate. And at the same time, in the same corporations, you still have some who are playing with the Machiavellian, you know, taking advantage, doing political, you know. So I think at the moment you have this both, and we see that also outside in society. It's an incredible group of people now that are becoming more conscious, more heart-based, and more authentic. And the other part is also still there. So, so I think it's very exciting what's happening on the one side now, with all these amazing people coming up, and who are, I think COVID played a big role. This lockdown, now you can use different language that before weren't even accepted. But the other part is still there too. So it's the contrast is getting wider, but I do have a lot of hope that it's still possible.
So you still have that juxtaposition, but we've come so far along. So what I'm curious about is, for emerging leaders, I would say for emerging female leaders, I would say you're in the right time, right? You can kind of strategically plan where you want to be. However, in certain sectors, we can agree that divide still exists.
Yes, it does.
So let's say you're a female emerging leader, and you've kind of have a good kind of tenure behind you, but you're looking to go forward, and maybe you're going into an arena that is maybe more, like you said, with the male concept of leadership, what kind of things might you suggest that these female leaders think about as they approach those environments versus deterring away from them altogether?
Yes. So if you choose to be there and plan to be there, I think it's a great opportunity in one way to learn about how those environments work and be very aware of ring fencing, so to speak, time to reflect and to take care of yourself. I noticed myself when I was in a very pushy environment in a bank where everything was very fast. I remember my husband at the time telling me how rude I'd become. And I really, yeah. So it was on the trade floor, and boom. And I didn't notice I had become like that. And so I think that you have to be very alert and awake to the power of culture and context. So, and using this both now, learn to be gender bilingual, as my friend Aviva Wittenberg-Cox always says. Like, we can learn the male way, we can learn the feminine way, and be whole human beings that can play on both fronts. So that's one thing we can do. And then the second thing we can do, or a woman now on her way up can do, is also to understand that not everything is about gender. So bad things that happen is maybe nothing to do with her being a woman, but also that some bad things that happen might have to do with gender and not with her personally. Because there are a lot of women, particularly young women, who think it's something wrong with them at an individual level, and they don't realize it's the whole system. It's a systemic discrimination, and it could be the systemic culture, the systemic way of making decisions is a systemic, and that they need to be awake to in order not to blame themselves. So it's two things. But there are also women who say, I cannot join this board because I'm a woman. Are you qualified? You also have to, it's not only about gender, it's not only about our various diversities, and it is also about that. So it's interesting.
So to have an objective lens, really, and to look at yourself and say, what are my strengths, what are my limitations, what are the realities of this bureaucratic potential structure that I'm wanting to enter, and to really, in my new book, ROR, I talk a little bit about, assessing your own skills as an authentic heart leader, really, and we all, as human beings, we love to look at our strengths, but I believe the gift is in looking at your limitations and recognizing those things and figuring out, what steps do I need? And then also, who do I need to surround myself with in order to get these skills too? And sometimes it may be a male colleague that
I know. It's also that, and there was also something else that came to mind just before, and that is that there's many women now who are extremely well educated. So young women do all over the world, at least in countries where you get access to education and so on. They do well at school, they get good grades. We have higher and higher education. So, and then we start working, many women start working, and it's still about sort of doing the excellent job to get the good grade, and we gotta be careful so it's not too much about pleasing in the hope of being one day recognized for that good girl. So this is, I fell in that. There's a lot of people I know, and then years later you're like exhausted and burned out, and so I don't know how to get the younger women to pick that up, but it's an important part of this perfectionism, this being. There's something.
I think that the Gen Zs and the Gen Xers are more coming from the space of value alignment. I could say that a lot of female leaders at my time, we were on that treadmill, absolutely, right. But now when I meet younger female leaders, they'll say, when I go for a situation or an interview, I'm looking for where's that value alignment with me?
Yeah, and this is so cool now. And this
Whereas,
is,
you know,
yeah.
earlier, and, you know, I'm thinking when I started my career, I was like, okay, well, I know where I want to get. So which hoops do I have to jump through to get that? And I'm just going to get it done. And now when I'm talking to like younger female leaders, they're like, well, I want to see what they're doing with the environment. Or in fact, I'd like to see, you know, how my leadership story, which I'm, you know, I'm talking to maybe somebody in their 20s and they're talking about their leadership story, which is really refreshing to hear, because I'm thinking, I'm looking at a lot of female leaders that are older that are now figuring out what their leadership story was, even though they've been embodying it all along. So I think it's generationally, I have experienced that, I'm sure you have too. They're coming from a place of strength that says, I bring these things, I'm a female. However, I recognize there's limitations, but it's not about me. The ones that have done a bit of, you know, coaching and awareness, and, you know, an awareness is such the gift that I think, you know, now it's kind of a bit of a given, right? You just have the mentor, you know, you do your coaching, you have that awareness, and you look at yourself holistically versus before it was kind of like, how am I going to fit into this role? And, you know, what am I going to do to morph myself into that?
Yeah.
You know.
This was such a great interview that we decided to turn it into a 2-part series. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2, so you don't miss out on the amazing content.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhage.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.